So what's going on here? Why is there this sort of discipline about performance measurement and this endless papers written by your current employer and many others about the importance of this, and why are we in a class that's much about the question of performance measurement when in fact many things can't be measured and perhaps folks aren't actually as interested in these metrics as you described George Soros as an example of someone who might be, and yet are still making these decisions about moving enormous sums of capital into this sector. What's going on? Any hypotheses?
I think there are a lot of rooms in the nonprofit industry. You know, like, so, and it's so interesting to me because, like, I could go to, let's say, okay, the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. They don't talk about, I've never heard any of them talk about social entrepreneurship, which is not that they don't respect it or don't understand it. I think it's oftentimes out, maybe it might be a generational thing. I just don't hear people even in like the immigrant rights movement really hold issues of, you know, matrices as dramatically as a lot of funders. So, you know, like in 2007, a lot of immigrant rights groups were really supporting and really trying to push comprehensive immigration reform, right? But since it failed, does that mean that they are failures or they aren't effective? You know, no, there are all these other social mechanics that actually impede upon an immigrant's experience in the U.S. and actually how the U.S. citizenry kind of supports or doesn't support either that labor force or that particular racial group, right? But I think what we don't have is a nuanced language to really hold all those pieces together, right? So that oftentimes they're in either absolute competition. And again, I really do think that one of the biggest issues is the fact that the comparative analysis around, let's say, a food pantry group, and I always find this interesting when I look at the kind of social entrepreneurship space, the types of groups that I think are much more in aligned with the kind of social entrepreneurship framework. Like, I think service delivery is really a good space that people can actually measure. I'm not sure that policy is as absolute because policy always gets diluted once it kind of gets passed, right? So people just kind of like, well, it's only like a part of it. It's like 10% of what I wanted, but is that impact as full as the 100% that was imagined?
I think it has to do with comfort with complexity, right? So you were describing in certain civil rights forums, you haven't heard a specific conversation about metrics, but I would bet, though I haven't been in too many of those conversations, I'm going to assume that some of the conversations I have been in around environmental justice issues or sexual reproductive health and rights issues, the people having the conversation, they understand one another, right? They don't need the metrics to communicate or express, but they know where they agree, they know where they disagree, they know where, you know, they've tried things in the past that have failed or succeeded, right? So, I mean, why do we have the metrics, right? We have the metrics to, as funders, to fulfill certain transparency obligations and to justify our existence and prove that we are living up to the public trust that's been entrusted to us, right? The notion that foundation was created with tax-advantaged capital, and if that money hadn't been delegated by the private citizen to go into the creation of the foundation, it would have gone into the tax base and paid for public programs, right? So the foundation has to sort of prove that it's going to use the money just as well as, maybe better than, if it had gone into the tax base and funded the government activities, right? So appropriately, there's been pressure on foundations to justify what they're doing, to prove that they're using the money responsibly, right? And so some of that, a lot of those questions are good questions to ask, and then you're looking for standard ways to compare across organizations, hold everyone to the same bar, and that's where a lot of the metrics come from. So I think you've got a couple of things happening. You've got folks who made money in business, succeeded using a certain framework, and are trying to bring that framework to another set of problems. with mixed success, right?
Mhm.
Some problems, I agree with your point about service delivery. You know, there are a lot of business work processes that relate to service delivery, inventory management, just-in-time inventory, you know, making sure that the operational workflow is as efficient as possible. It's going to build the organizational effectiveness. And hopefully, if the organizational effectiveness is linked to its social impact, it will grow the social impact too, right? So I think we have both folks succeeding in the private sector now trying to address social problems and bringing the frames and the tools that they're familiar with, and a not bad set of questions that it came up in the last 10 years about transparency, misuse or, you know, underuse of public funds, you know, bad behavior by some folks at foundations, stuff like that. So I think those two things together have given us this overemphasis on metrics.